They forced me to marry her to teach me a lesson. What a cruel irony. The words echo through the opulent Beaumont mansion in Florence, Alabama, a cold monument to wealth and control. A young black woman, a seamstress scraping by on mending old clothes, stands defiant in a world that scorns her. She endures sneers, underpaid work, and whispers of not belonging because of her skin and status. Yet her needle weaves magic, turning scraps into art. In a city divided by class and color, a chance encounter sparks a scandal that shakes the elite. Will her talent and pride unravel a legacy of prejudice? The truth lies in a single green stitch. Subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories and share where Odessa you're from in the comments. We're dying to know. Stay tuned to uncover the shocking twist that redefines a family's fate. The grand Beaumont mansion loomed over Florence, Alabama, its marble columns gleaming under the sun like sentinels of power. Inside, Richard Beaumont, a titan of industry with silver hair and a gaze as sharp as steel, sat at the head of a polished mahogany table. His son, Ethan, stood across from him, his jaw tight, eyes burning with defiance. "I won't marry her, father," Ethan said, his voice steady but laced with frustration. "I don't love Victoria Langford, and I never will." Richard's fist slammed the table, rattling the crystal decanter. "Love? You think love builds empires? Victoria's family owns half the textile trade in the South. This marriage secures our legacy." Ethan shook his head, his heart tethered to ideals his father couldn't grasp. He dreamed of a life beyond wealth, one where compassion and art held more value than stock portfolios. Outside, Florence buzzed with its small-town charm, but beneath the surface ran currents of division, class, race, and unspoken rules. Ethan, at 28, had grown weary of his father's world, where status trumped humanity. He often wandered the city's quieter streets, seeking solace in its raw, unpolished corners. One humid afternoon, as he passed a crumbling sidewalk near the river, he noticed a young black woman kneeling beside a boy in tattered clothes. Her hands moved with precision, stitching a tear in his shirt with a needle that danced like an artist's brush. The boy grinned, marveling at the neat repair. Ethan paused, drawn to her focus. Her dark eyes, sharp with intelligence, met his. "You're staring," she said, not unkindly, her voice carrying a quiet pride. Ethan smiled, caught off guard. "I'm just impressed. You turned that rag into something new." She shrugged, brushing a braid from her face. "It's just mending. Keeps me alive." Her name, he learned, was Naomi, a seamstress who lived in a cramped apartment above a laundromat. She spoke of fabrics like a poet, describing how she could coax beauty from scraps others discarded. But her words carried a weight. Clients often paid her less than promised, some muttering she should be grateful for the work, given her background. One woman, a wealthy matron in a fur stole, tossed a few crumpled dollars at her, sneering, "That's plenty for someone like you." Ethan's stomach churned at the injustice, but Naomi's chin lifted, her dignity unshaken. He offered to buy her coffee, and though she hesitated, wary of his wealth, she agreed. Over chipped mugs at a diner, Ethan discovered her wit, her dreams of designing clothes that told stories, and her resilience against a world that tried to dim her light. Their conversation stretched into hours, but it was cut short when Richard's driver spotted Ethan and reported back. That evening, Richard summoned Ethan to the mansion study, his face a mask of rage. "A seamstress? A black girl from the wrong side of town?" he spat, pacing before a roaring fireplace. "You're throwing our name into the mud." Ethan stood his ground. "She's brilliant, father. She's worth more than your precious alliances." Richard's eyes narrowed, a cruel idea forming. "Fine. If you're so enamored, you'll marry her. Let's see how your ideals survive when the world laughs at you." Ethan froze, disbelief crashing over him. "You can't be serious." Richard's voice turned cold. "It's her or disinheritance. You'll lose everything. Your trust fund, your place in this family. Choose." Naomi, too, was blindsided when Ethan arrived at her apartment that night, his face pale. He explained Richard's ultimatum, his voice heavy with guilt. "I can't let him destroy you," he said. If I refuse, he'll ruin your life, blacklist you from every shop in Florence, spread lies to keep you from work. Naomi's hands trembled as she clutched a spool of thread. She knew Richard's power. He could crush her fragile livelihood with a single phone call. Her landlord had already threatened eviction, and she supported an ailing aunt who relied on her income. Refusing the marriage would mean losing everything she'd fought for: her home, her aunt's care, her dreams. "This is a trap," she whispered, tears welling. Ethan nodded, his eyes pleading. "I know, but I promise to protect you. We'll face this together." With no other choice, Naomi agreed, her heart heavy with dread. The wedding was a quiet affair, held in a small chapel on the outskirts of town. A handful of Ethan's friends attended, their smiles strained. Naomi wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself, its clean lines a testament to her skill. Ethan, in a modest suit, held her hand tightly, whispering, "We'll make this work." But the news spread like wildfire through Florence's elite circles. At a charity luncheon days later, Victoria Langford, a statuesque blonde with a venomous smile, cornered Naomi. "You think you belong here?" she hissed, her voice loud enough for the room to hear. "A seamstress playing princess? You're nothing but a charity case." The crowd tittered, some nodding in agreement, their glances dripping with disdain for Naomi's skin and status. Ethan stepped forward, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "She's more than you'll ever be, Victoria. She creates. You just buy." Naomi's heart raced, torn between gratitude and humiliation. Back at her tiny workshop, a damp basement cluttered with fabric scraps, Naomi threw herself into her work to drown out the whispers. Ethan visited daily, bringing supplies and encouragement. "You're not just mending clothes," he told her, watching her stitch a vibrant patchwork skirt. "You're telling stories." His words sparked something in her, and she began designing small pieces, dresses, jackets, each one bold and unique. One day, Clara Hayes, a boutique owner with a sharp eye and a reputation for fairness, stopped by. Clara, a middle-aged woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, examined Naomi's work with a raised eyebrow. "This isn't just sewing," she said. "This is art. Let me sell these in my shop." Naomi hesitated, fearing rejection, but Clara's sincerity won her over. "You've got something special," Clara said. "Don't let this town tell you otherwise." Clara's boutique, a chic storefront in downtown Florence, displayed Naomi's designs in its window. Passers-by stopped, drawn to the vivid colors and daring cuts. A few pieces sold and whispers of a new talent began to circulate. But not everyone was impressed. At a local cafe, a group of wealthy women scoffed as they passed Naomi, one muttering, "She's just a fad. People like her don't last in this business." Naomi overheard, her fists clenching, but she channeled the pain into her needle, each stitch a defiance of their doubt. Ethan, meanwhile, faced his own battles. Richard cut his allowance, forcing him to dip into savings to support Naomi's work. "He thinks I'll break," Ethan told Clara one evening, his voice weary but resolute. "But I won't. Not for her." As Naomi's designs gained traction, Richard's anger grew. He saw her rising popularity as a direct affront to his control. At a tense dinner, he confronted Ethan. "You're making a fool of us," he growled. "End this charade or I'll end it for you." Ethan leaned forward, his eyes blazing. "You forced this marriage, father. Now live with it." Naomi, sitting silently, felt the weight of their conflict. She knew her presence was a spark in a powder keg, but she refused to let Richard's cruelty define her. With Clara's mentorship and Ethan's unwavering support, she began to dream bigger, a collection that could challenge Florence's elite and prove her worth. The seeds of hope were taking root, but the ground beneath them was unstable, ready to shift with a single revelation. The seeds of hope were taking root, but the ground beneath them was unstable, ready to shift with a single revelation. Naomi's needle flew through fabric in her basement workshop, each stitch a quiet rebellion against the whispers of Florence's elite. Her designs, vibrant and bold, were no longer just mending. They were statements, weaving stories of resilience into every seam. Clara Hayes, her mentor and champion, had turned her boutique into a showcase for Naomi's work. By spring, the storefront's window glowed with dresses that blended thrift store scraps with daring elegance, drawing crowds and whispers of a new voice in fashion. A local blogger raved about the seamstress with a spark, but the praise came with a sting. Her post noted Naomi's unusual background, a veiled jab at her race and poverty that left a bitter taste. Clara, undeterred, pushed Naomi to think bigger. "You're not just selling clothes," she said one evening, her eyes sharp over a glass of iced tea. "You're challenging this town's narrow mind." Naomi nodded, her heart swelling with possibility. She spent nights sketching a debut collection, each piece a canvas of her struggles, dresses with jagged hems symbolizing broken dreams, jackets with bright linings for hidden strength. Clara secured a slot for Naomi's work at a small gallery show, where her pieces sold out in hours. The buzz grew and orders poured in, but not without resistance. A boutique owner across town, a silver-haired woman with a pinched smile, refused to stock Naomi's designs, muttering to Clara, "Her work's too loud for our clientele." The words hung heavy, a coded dismissal of Naomi's identity. Victoria Langford, still seething from Ethan's public defense of Naomi, saw the rising star as a personal affront. From her sleek office at Langford Textiles, she orchestrated a smear campaign. Gossip columns, bankrolled by her family's wealth, painted Naomi as a gold digger who'd trapped Ethan for fame. One article, splashed across a tabloid's front page, sneered, "From rags to riches, the seamstress's scheme." The headline cut deep, and Naomi felt the eyes of strangers on her at the market, their glances laced with suspicion. A shopkeeper, handing her change, murmured, "Hope you're not in over your head, honey." Naomi's fists clenched, but she channeled the hurt into her work, stitching late into the night, her designs growing fiercer, more defiant. Ethan, meanwhile, fought his own battles. He'd taken to managing Naomi's orders, negotiating with suppliers who raised eyebrows at his wife's name. At a downtown cafe, a businessman in a tailored suit leaned over, smirking. "Heard you married for charity, Beaumont. Hope it's worth the scandal." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he refused to let the taunts break him. He poured his energy into supporting Naomi, delivering bolts of fabric to her workshop and cheering her on. One evening, as they sorted sketches under a flickering bulb, Naomi paused, her voice soft. "Why do you keep fighting for me? This could ruin you." Ethan met her gaze, his eyes steady. "Because you're worth it, and because I believe in you." The tension reached a boiling point at a charity gala held at the Florence Arts Center, a glittering event attended by the city's elite. Ethan and Naomi arrived together, her in a sleek gown of her own design, its deep indigo fabric catching the light. The room buzzed, but not all eyes were kind. Victoria, draped in a designer dress, cornered Ethan near the bar, her voice dripping with venom. "You're a fool parading her like she belongs here." Ethan straightened, his voice carrying across the room. "Talent doesn't need a pedigree, Victoria. Naomi's work speaks louder than your money ever will." The crowd fell silent, some nodding in approval, others whispering behind their champagne flutes. Naomi stood taller, her heart pounding with pride and fear. The moment went viral, shared across social media with hashtags like "Nari's sure Beaumont stands up," but it only fueled Victoria's wrath. The pinnacle came when Clara secured Naomi a spot at the Florence Fashion Showcase, a prestigious runway event that drew critics, buyers, and influencers. Naomi's collection, titled Threads of Grit, was a bold gamble, 10 pieces that blended raw textures with intricate stitching, each telling a story of survival. The night of the show, the venue thrummed with anticipation. Naomi paced backstage, her nerves fraying as models slipped into her designs. Ethan squeezed her hand, whispering, "You've got this." But as the first model stepped onto the runway, the lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. Gas rippled through the audience. Naomi's heart sank. She knew this was no accident. Victoria, seated in the front row, smirked, her phone glowing as she typed furiously. Then a spark of defiance. A young woman in the audience, a black teenager from the community center where Naomi volunteered, raised her phone, its flashlight cutting through the dark. Others followed, dozens of tiny beams illuminating the runway. The crowd roared, and Naomi, tears in her eyes, signaled the models to continue. The show became a triumph, each piece glowing under the makeshift light, the jagged hems and bold colors mesmerizing the audience. Critics called it the runway of lights, and clips of the event spread online, cementing Naomi's name as a force in fashion. Backstage, Clara hugged her tightly. "You turned their sabotage into magic," she said. Naomi smiled, but the victory felt fragile, shadowed by the hatred that had tried to dim her. Richard Beaumont, seated in the back, watched the show with a mix of awe and unease. One dress, a flowing piece with a single green stitch running there through its seam, stopped him cold. It was a detail he hadn't seen in decades, a signature of the woman he'd loved and left. A black seamstress who'd vanished from his life under his family's pressure. The green stitch, a private vow they'd shared, haunted him. Could Naomi be her daughter? His mind raced, piecing together fragments of a past he'd buried. He left the venue abruptly, his face pale, avoiding Ethan's questioning gaze. The possibility gnawed at him, a secret that could unravel everything he'd built. Naomi, unaware of Richard's turmoil, returned to her workshop that night, her hands trembling with adrenaline. The success of the show was undeniable, but the cost was steep. She found a note slipped under her door, unsigned but unmistakably Victoria's work. "Enjoy your moment, it won't last." The words stung, echoing the doubts planted by every slight, every underpaid job, every sidelong glance. Yet Naomi refused to break. She picked up her needle, sketching a new design, a dress that would scream defiance, its fabric a patchwork of the scraps she'd been handed her whole life. Ethan, sitting beside her, watched in quiet admiration. "They can't stop you," he said. Naomi nodded, her eyes fierce. "Let them try." The world was watching now, but the spotlight cast long shadows. Naomi's rise was a beacon for some and a threat to others, and the battle lines were drawn. Florence, with its polished surface and hidden divides, was a stage where talent and prejudice would clash. For every supporter like Clara, there was a Victoria waiting to strike, and for every triumph, a whisper of doubt. Naomi's needle was her weapon, but the war was far from won. Naomi's needle was her weapon, but the war was far from won. In the quiet of her workshop, surrounded by bolts of fabric and the hum of a second-hand sewing machine, she poured her defiance into a new collection, Seam of Mercy. Each piece was a testament to survival, with delicate threads weaving tales of pain and hope. The success of the Runway of Lights had made her a local legend, but the whispers of Florence's elite still lingered, their doubts sharpened by her race and origins. Naomi ignored them, her focus unwavering as she prepared for her next show. Yet beneath her resolve, a storm was brewing, one that would unravel the fragile world she and Ethan had built. Clara Hayes, ever the vigilant ally, was tidying Naomi's workshop one humid afternoon when she found a small wooden box tucked beneath a pile of fabric scraps. Inside was a silver locket, its surface worn, but etched with a delicate script. "To my heart, forever." Clara's brow furrowed. She'd seen Naomi wear it once, a keepsake from her late mother. On a hunch, she contacted a private investigator, a friend from her college days, and shared a suspicion that had been growing since the green stitch caught Richard's eye. "This locket," Clara said, clutching it tightly, "it's more than a trinket. It's a clue." The investigator traced its origins, uncovering a faded marriage certificate linking Naomi's mother to a man named Richard Beaumont. Clara's heart sank. She arranged a discreet DNA test, using a strand of Naomi's hair and a sample from Richard's discarded coffee cup. The results were undeniable. Naomi was Richard's daughter. The revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Clara, trembling, brought the evidence to Naomi in the workshop. Naomi stared at the papers, her hands shaking as she read the words, "Biological match confirmed." "He's my father?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The man who'd forced her into a marriage to humiliate Ethan, who'd dismissed her as lower class, was her own flesh and blood. Worse, it meant Ethan, the man she'd grown to love, was her brother. The marriage, already a fragile arrangement born of coercion, was now a legal and moral impossibility. Clara, her eyes soft with empathy, reached for Naomi's hand. "We'll get through this," she said, but Naomi pulled away, her world collapsing. "I trusted him," she said, her voice raw. "I trusted both of them." Ethan was in New York when Clara called, his phone buzzing as he sat in a cramped office, at a nonprofit for social justice. "You need to come back," Clara said, her tone urgent. "It's about Naomi." Ethan caught the next flight to Florence, his mind racing. When he arrived at Clara's boutique, Naomi was there, her eyes red, the locket clutched in her fist. Clara explained the truth, her voice steady but heavy. Ethan staggered back, his face pale. "My sister?" he choked out. The love he felt for Naomi, once a beacon of hope, now felt like a betrayal of nature itself. He looked at Naomi, searching for words, but she turned away, her silence louder than any scream. The marriage was annulled that week, a quiet legal proceeding that left both shattered. Naomi retreated into her work, her needle moving faster, her designs darker. Seam of Mercy took on a new weight, its pieces now reflecting the raw ache of betrayal. She stitched jagged patterns into silk, each one a scar of her broken trust. At the community center where she volunteered, she taught sewing to young girls, many of them black and from struggling families. One girl, noticing Naomi's distant gaze, asked, "Why do you keep sewing even when you're sad?" Naomi paused, then smiled faintly. "Because it's how I fight." But alone in her workshop, she wrestled with rage and grief. Richard, the father she never knew, had abandoned her mother, leaving them to poverty's mercy, and now his cruelty had torn her life apart again. A neighbor, unaware of the truth, commented casually, "You're lucky to be in that mansion, girl. Most of us don't get that chance." The words stung, a reminder of the world's skewed lens. Ethan, meanwhile, sought refuge in New York's chaos. He threw himself into pro bono legal work, helping tenants fight evictions and workers challenge unfair wages. But every night, his thoughts returned to Naomi, the way her eyes lit up when she sketched, the strength in her quiet defiance. He couldn't reconcile the love he felt with the truth that now divided them. In a quiet moment, he called Clara, his voice heavy. "How do I face her?" he asked. Clara sighed. "You start by facing yourself." Ethan knew he couldn't stay away forever. Florence was home, and Naomi was family, however painful that truth was. He booked a flight back, determined to salvage something from the wreckage. Back in Florence, the Beaumont Empire faced its own turmoil. Victoria Langford, sensing weakness, rallied the board of directors to oust Ethan as heir. In a sleek boardroom overlooking the city, she stood, her voice sharp. "Ethan's scandal has tarnished our brand. A seamstress as a wife? It's a liability." The board murmured agreement, their eyes avoiding Ethan's. But Ethan rose, his presence commanding despite his exhaustion. "This company isn't just about profit," he said, his voice steady. "It's about people. Naomi's talent, her vision, could open our doors to communities we've ignored. That's the future I see." He outlined a plan to diversify the brand, partnering with local artisans and prioritizing ethical production. The board, swayed by his passion and the viral success of Naomi's runway, voted narrowly to keep him. Victoria stormed out, her plans thwarted, but her venom undimmed. Richard, meanwhile, was unraveling. The DNA results had confirmed his worst fears, and memories of Naomi's mother flooded back. A woman whose laughter had once softened his edges, whom he'd abandoned for the sake of his family's approval. He locked himself in his study, staring at old letters he'd kept hidden. A longtime colleague, unaware of the full story, remarked, "You always said you didn't want ties to that side of town." The words, laced with casual prejudice, cut deeper now. Richard's guilt was a weight he couldn't shake. He avoided Naomi and Ethan, unable to face the pain he'd caused. At night he wandered the mansion's halls, haunted by the green stitch that had unraveled his carefully constructed world. Naomi, despite her turmoil, pressed forward with Seam of Mercy. The collection was her rebellion, each piece a cry against the injustice of her past. At the community center, she poured her energy into her students, teaching them to stitch their own stories. One evening, as she adjusted a girl's hem, she overheard a parent whisper, "She's talented, but she'll never fit in with the big names." Naomi's jaw tightened, but she kept sewing, her needle steady. The show was weeks away, and she was determined to make it a statement, not just of her talent, but of her right to exist in a world that tried to erase her. Ethan's return loomed, and with it, the promise of a reckoning. The truth had broken them, But Naomi's stitches held fast, weaving a fragile hope for what might come next. The truth had broken them, but Naomi's stitches held fast, weaving a fragile hope for what might come next. In the dim light of her workshop, she prepared for the seam of mercy show, her hands steady despite the ache in her heart. The revelation that Richard was her father and Ethan her brother had shattered their world, but Naomi refused to let it define her. Her designs, now infused with raw emotion, spoke of redemption and resilience, each stitch a step toward reclaiming her story. Florence buzzed with anticipation for her show, but the city's elite still whispered, their words sharp with doubt. She's talented, but can she really belong? Naomi ignored them, her focus on the runway ahead, where she would prove her worth not just to Florence, but to herself. Richard Beaumont, haunted by his past, knew he could no longer hide. The green stitch, a ghost of his lost love, had forced him to face the pain he'd caused. He sent a letter to Naomi and Ethan, requesting a meeting at the Beaumont mansion. "I owe you the truth," he wrote, his hand trembling. Ethan, back from New York, agreed reluctantly, his trust in his father frayed. Naomi hesitated, her anger still raw, but Clara urged her to go. "You don't have to forgive him," Clara said, her voice firm, "but you deserve to hear him out." Naomi nodded, steeling herself. The mansion, once a symbol of cold power, loomed before them as they arrived, its marble halls heavy with unspoken history. Inside the grand study, Richard stood by the fireplace, his face etched with regret. He looked older, his shoulders slumped under the weight of guilt. "I was wrong," he began, his voice breaking. "I loved your mother, Naomi, but I let my family's expectations tear us apart. I didn't know about you until now, and when I forced you to marry Ethan, I thought I was saving our legacy. Instead, I destroyed it." Naomi's eyes burned, but she held his gaze. "You left us to suffer," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "You built this empire on pride, and it cost me everything." Ethan, standing beside her, clenched his fists. "Why didn't you fight for her mother? For us?" Richard's head bowed. "I was a coward, but I want to make it right." Naomi's heart wavered between rage and exhaustion. She thought of her mother, stitching late into the night to feed her, and of the years spent scraping by while Richard lived in splendor. Yet his brokenness stirred something in her, a flicker of compassion. "I can't erase what you did," she said, her voice softening, "but I won't let your mistakes define me. I forgive you, but you have to live with what you've done." Ethan, his anger still simmering, looked at Naomi's resolve and felt a shift. "I'm not there yet," he told Richard, his tone cold, "but for her sake, I'll try." Richard nodded, tears in his eyes, promising to support them however they chose to move forward. The Seam of Mercy show was Naomi's chance to rewrite her narrative. She decided to host it at the Beaumont Mansion, transforming its sterile grandeur into a stage for the marginalized. She invited her students from the community center, mostly Black and Latino teens from Florence's poorer neighborhoods, to present their own designs alongside hers. The event, billed as a community runway, drew a diverse crowd, from local artists to skeptical elites. Naomi led the show, her opening piece a flowing dress with a single green stitch, a nod to her mother's legacy. The teens followed, their creations bold and unpolished, earning cheers from the audience. A critic in the crowd whispered, "This isn't fashion, it's revolution." Naomi overheard and smiled, her heart swelling with pride. Ethan, inspired by Naomi's courage, took the stage after the runway. He announced the creation of a legal fund for Florence's underserved, offering free representation to those facing evictions or workplace discrimination. "This is for the people this town overlooks," he said, his voice ringing clear. "Naomi showed me what's possible when you fight for what's right." The crowd erupted, but some elites shifted uncomfortably, their privilege challenged. Victoria Langford, seated in the back, scoffed, but her influence was waning, her earlier smears drowned out by the crowd's support. Richard, watching from a shadowed corner, stepped forward, his presence surprising the room. He announced he would donate 20% of his personal shares in the Beaumont Empire to establish the Green Stitch Fund, a program to teach sewing and design to immigrant women. "This is my penance," he said, his voice low but resolute. "I can't undo the past, but I can build a better future. The announcement stunned Naomi and Ethan. They exchanged a glance, their bond unspoken but unbreakable. They knew they could never be husband and wife, but the love they shared, now redefined as familial and artistic, ran deeper than convention. "We're partners," Naomi said later, as they stood in the mansion's garden, the runway lights fading behind them. "In art, in purpose, in everything that matters." Ethan nodded, his eyes bright with resolve. "You've always been my strength. That won't change." They agreed to transform the Beaumont Mansion into a center for art and justice, its doors open to all, a stark contrast to its once exclusive legacy. A groundskeeper, overhearing their plans, muttered, "Never thought I'd see this place welcome folks like me." His words, tinged with awe, underscored the shift. Richard retreated to a quieter role, his wealth now funding scholarships and community programs. He spent evenings writing letters to Naomi and Ethan, offering support without expectation. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he wrote in one, "but I'll spend my life earning it." Naomi read the letter in her workshop, her fingers tracing the green stitch on a new design. She felt a weight lift, not fully, but enough to breathe. Ethan, meanwhile, began restructuring the Beaumont empire, prioritizing ethical practices and community partnerships. He hired Naomi's students as interns, giving them a foothold in a world that had long excluded them. At a local diner, a waitress remarked, "Didn't think a Beaumont would ever care about us regular folks." Ethan smiled, thinking of Naomi's influence. The community runway became a turning point for Florence. Naomi's designs, now celebrated beyond the city, carried a message of hope forged in pain. Her students, emboldened by the event, began their own projects, their voices rising where silence once reigned. Ethan and Naomi, bound by shared loss and purpose, worked side by side, their partnership a testament to resilience. Richard, though still haunted by guilt, found solace in small acts, funding a sewing machine for a single mother, attending a student's art show. The mansion, once a cold fortress, pulsed with life, its halls filled with laughter and creativity. Naomi stood on its balcony one evening, watching the sunset, her needle still in hand. She knew the scars of the past would linger, but forgiveness had carved a path forward, a path she would walk with Ethan, not as lovers, but as allies in a fight for something greater. What a journey we've shared through the green stitch. Naomi, Ethan, and Richard's story of betrayal, forgiveness, and redemption reminds us that even the deepest wounds can weave a new legacy. Did Naomi's courage inspire you? How did Ethan's stand against prejudice resonate? Or perhaps Richard's redemption sparked hope? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and share where you're tuning in from. Your voice keeps this story alive, and we're grateful for every moment you've spent with us. If this tale touched your heart, hit that subscribe button to catch our next emotional adventure. Thank you for joining us in Florence, Alabama, where a single stitch changed everything. Until next time, keep believing in the power of hope and second chances. We'll see you in the comments in our next story. Stay connected.